Okay, let's get started with our product animation. This is going to be the layout I'm going to use to start out with. I just have a 3D viewport over on this side. I've got the bottom right hand window going to be our rendered viewport, and then right here I've got this set up right now to be a shader editor. This is how it was when we finished part 2. You can also download this file exactly as it is to start off of my Patreon for free. The link is in the description. So we're going to set this bottom right hand corner, hold Z and set it to rendered. This is the lights that we have set up from part 2, but we're going to do everything from scratch. So I'm just going to grab both of those and delete. There's a little bit of light still in this scene, so make sure you go into world and then set the strength to 0. So now you have a fully black scene. So this is going to be kind of a minimalist render. So the first thing I'm going to do is Shift A, mesh plane. I'm going to rotate it by 9 degrees on the x-axis, GY to move it back. I'm going to tab into edit mode and scale. And then in the shader editor, I'm going to click new and then take this principled BSDF, delete it, Shift A, and then we're going to search for an emission texture. Plug that emission straight into the surface. So now what we have is we have a solid white background. You can even increase this a little bit if you want to get it a little bit brighter. But we're going to change the rotation of everything. But this is kind of what we're going to use as a backlight to be a solid, consistent color for all our different shots. We're going to set up 3 shots, and this is going to be the first one. So right now we don't have a camera. So I'm just going to go into the front view, Shift A, camera. You can see it's right here. I'm going to move it back along the Y. Now, to get really good camera animations, a trick I learned from Derek Elliott is to use an empty to control this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into top view and then just Shift A and empty. And I'm going to use a sphere just so I know we're going to use several empties. I'm going to use a sphere because I keep that tied to my camera. I'm going to scale that up just a little bit to give us a little bit of easier to see. And then I'm going to click the camera, shift click the empty object, and then Control P and do Object Keep Transform. So now what happens is if I go over here and click 0 on my number pad, that's going to put us in camera view. Already this kind of looks neat, but we can now take this empty and we can rotate it to get really nice views and different angles without messing with our original shape or our original orientation of our model. And then one thing that we're also going to do for this one, because we want the solid background to always be behind our camera, I'm also going to click the plane and then click the empty, Control P, Object Keep Transform. And so now when we rotate this, you can double R, click R twice, and that's going to give you trackball rotation. Now, however we look at this, that white background is always going to be behind it, so that's going to be pretty cool. Okay, now, one thing that we're going to do is I want to be able to move this also if we didn't want to move the camera. So what I want to do is I'm going to grab this empty and I'm going to do GX and hold Control, and I'm just going to move it. If you see in the top left, it says -5. So that's just going to let me be able to get access to this. So we're going to do another empty to control this. So Shift A, empty. I'm going to use a cube, scale it in the X. I'm going to go into right view, scale in the Z, just something that kind of represents that this is what it is. And then I'm just going to box select everything in the middle. And then what I really want is to deselect that by holding Shift and click and select it again. And then Control P, Object Keep Transform. So now what we have is if we go back, we click this, GX, hold Control, snaps it right back to the middle. Now we can leave our camera the same and we can double R and rotate. And then like you can just start getting some really nice angles. You can already see this is a really cool setup just because there's tons of ways that you can set this up and have dark silhouettes. You can play with your lights, and we're going to be using a lot of that for these renders. So what we're going to do is we're going to create that first shot that you saw from the beginning of the video, which is kind of a zoomed in on this corner. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the camera empty to be focused on this point around here. And then for these types of shots, something that looks really good is to click the camera and then set the focal length to something like 125. And then now what we can do is we can start looking for good camera angles. And so we're going to use this sideways orientation because it's going to be for YouTube. But if you were doing this for Instagram or for YouTube Shorts, you would want to use a vertical orientation and then adjust the composition of your shot accordingly. So oh yeah, one thing that we also need to do, don't ever render a shot without using some depth of field. I've learned that from some industry professionals. So we're going to Shift A, we're going to add one more empty, and we're going to make this a plane axis. I like to use these 3 different shapes so I can know what things I'm looking at. It gets a little confusing to see this empty and then the box empty and then also this empty, but having them have different, shapes helps out a lot. So what we're going to do is we're going to click F2 and then rename this to depth of field target. And then this folder up here is lights and camera action. I just make sure that all these things are in here. So let's go ahead and rename them. We're going to call this the synth controller. And then we're going to call this our camera controller or camera rig. And then we have our depth of field target. So what we need to do is we need to take our camera, go into the depth of field, select the focus object, and then just type DOF. So click that depth of field target. So now just as a test, we can do R and then RX around the X-axis. And then we need to bring our depth of field target something to what we're looking at. So this is the point, the origin of the camera rig. So I'm going to just bring this kind of close so that we're kind of focused where we're going to look at. And then now what we really need is some good lighting to kind of see what we're dealing with. But just real quick, we'll move this guy in. And there's not a lot you can see. So let's just go ahead and add a light and we'll go from there. So we're going to Shift A, light, and we're going to use an area. And then what I'm going to do is just go into right view, bring it up. We're just going to bring it something over here. And now what we kind of want is good renders always have variation in lighting. You can tell a lot of beginner renders don't have any depth. You have very flat, shallow lighting. Everything's kind of lit evenly. So one thing that we want to do is we want to try to shake that up, have some shadows, have contrast. Polyfjord talks about it in one of his videos. I'll probably put a card or a link to it in the description, but that a good way to think about placing lights in 3D scenes is to try to create shadows. That really helps you move into it, creating some visual interest. So what we're going to do for this one is I'm going to bump the strength up to 25. And then what I really want is for there to be kind of some sharp fall offs. So what we're going to do is we're going to decrease this spread, and I'm going to go to something like 20 degrees. And then now you can see in the render, there's this setup right here. But what I want to do is I'm going to bring this in the Y to where it's coming across. You can see this nice shadow. And then you can play around with the scale of your light. So as you bring that up and down, it's kind of changing the way this looks. So I'm going to leave this at something like 2. And then I want to scale it to where it's kind of a long, skinny light. So I'm going to scale in the Y direction, something like this, and then bring that scale back down to where it's kind of like a strip, long strip. And then we're just going to bring this over. I'm going to give it a little bit of rotation in this direction. So now we kind of have a little bit of lighting going on. Let's drop this down to 20. It's a little overexposed. Okay. So now we go back into camera view and then we look at this as we click our camera and then go to the depth of field. This f-stop, if you're familiar with photography, this is what would control the distance of what's in and out of focus. So if we drop this to 1, you can see that it's getting very blurry toward the back. And then this is how you do a rack focus in Blender. You can just move this up and down. So now I'm kind of focused on this third row and these are out of focus, and I can just move these, and you can keyframe the location of this in the shot to kind of give it a shift in focus, which is pretty cool. So now what we kind of want to do is we want to recreate that first shot on the camera angle. Now that we have some decent lighting, we're going to kind of set that up. So what I'm going to do is rotate and then XX so that I'm on the local X axis. If you rotate it on the X, you would be technically doing the same thing, but if you rotate this on the Z and get something like this, now if I rotate it on X, it's moving along the X axis, but what I want it to do is rotate along the X axis of this empty. So RXX puts you in that. So now you can kind of shift this up. That was good. Now I'm going to go ahead and move this camera. I'm just going to move it up in the Z axis a little bit. And then I'm also going to GZZ, and that's going to basically move it in along its axis. So already you can see we're kind of getting that shot set up the way we want it. So I'm going to move this back into something that's in frame. And then we're going to take our light. We basically want a little bit of shadow over here. So I'm just going to bring it over something like that. Now you can see we have very dark areas down here. So what I'm just going to do is I'm going to just add in another light. And then I'm going to go into right view, bring it out, rotate it, go into top view, bring it up. Now we can just basically play with this until we get some fall off that we like. So I may just rotate this over and then just GX until we get a little bit of a gradient to where it's kind of coming darker to this point. And then you could also put one, you could also just bring it out if you wanted it to come all the way to here. That'll kind of play with this area here. So then it really comes down to just finding a camera angle that you like. I'm going to click the rotator and then XX. I'm going to give it something like that. RZ. So now I'm rotating along the Z axis. This looks really good right here to me. And then we're going to grab our depth of field and we're going to bring that a little bit closer to what we're looking at. Okay, so now for your first shot, I'm going to use 60 frame shots. I'm also using 30 frames per second. So in your output, click 24, click 30. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this animation to 60 frames. I'm going to go to frame 1. And then grabbing this camera rig, I'm just going to rotate it into something that I think looks cool. Something like that. Also, I think it needs to be a little bit steeper, angle down. Something more like that. That looks good. So I'm going to go to top view, insert, location and rotation keyframe. And then I'm just going to come out to here, RZ, give it a rotate. Something like that. Insert, location and rotation. And now we've got this set up as a shader editor. I'm going to click this and go in E. That's just the hotkey to get to the graph editor. I'm going to click N to hide this panel. And then the home key on your keyboard will normalize this to where you can see everything. The location of this camera rig is not changing, so I'm just going to hide all these and then click home again. I'm also going to hide the only thing that's rotating right now is the X and Y. So I'm going to click home. And then just to show you what this does, I'm going to hover over this and click A to select all the keyframes, and then T. That's going to bring up this interpolation mode. We want it to be linear. So if I played it right now, you can see that it basically it starts, I'm going to set this to rendered or solid so you can see. It starts slow and it speeds up in the middle. It's this curve basically here, this Bezier curve. So what I want to do is I'm going to click A, T, and then click linear. And so now it's basically just rotating in a solid or in a constant speed. But one thing that I do want to do is I'm going to come to this 60 and then I want to do RXX and I want to give this a little bit of rotation this way also. And then I'm going to reinsert a keyframe by clicking I in location and rotation. And that's pretty much it, except now you can see that it looks weird because you can see that it's not moving linearly. So if I scroll back out and I look at like the X rotation, you can see that this is set up or it's not linear. So I'm gonna click A, T, and reset it to linear. So now if you kind of look in your bottom rendered view, you've got this very nice 2-axis movement. So the last thing that we want to do is check our lighting. So we're gonna go back into the rendered view. This looks good. I like the way this looks. Matter of fact, let's just do a test render. I'm setting right now at 500 samples. I'll go through that at the end, but this looks good. And then the other thing that we want to do is as we go over to here, things that really set some renders apart is to have some movement on your lights. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move this over actually let's just rotate it. And I'm going to click escape and do it again. So you can see right now we've got a little bit of dark fall off on here. I actually want to bring this over. I don't want there to be any dark areas on this side. So I'm going to scale in the X. That gives us a little bit better light on this. And then also the f-stop is a little bit too high from our setting the depth of field. So I'm going to grab this, or actually I'm going to grab the camera, click the camera settings, and then let's bring this up to like 1.8. That way we still get some detail on these buttons and stuff back here. So then what I'm going to do is click this light and go back to the beginning. And you can see that we have a little bit of fall off here, and this is a little bit darker. We can also bring this, if we go to top view, we can bring this a little bit closer if we want some better light there. That looks good. So now what we're going to do is just, when we see this light has a little bit of fall off here, and then we're going to come to here, we can see that it's kind of dark. I'm just going to click this and go to the front view. Actually, let's go to the beginning. On frame 0, insert a location rotation, and then on frame 60, we're going to also add some rotation and bring that out until it's not as dark on this corner. Actually, that's a little bit too much. And then we're also going to bring it down a little bit and try to brighten it up a little bit. That's going to help give it some variation. So now I'm going to click insert location rotation. I'm going to make sure this is selected and then click A, T, linear. So now that this is moving in a straight line. So now you can see we have some dynamic pieces. The camera's moving in 2 axes. The light is moving. We're getting lots better. This is how you can get things that look more professional and don't look like straight line, very simple animation. So now I can just play this through and you can kind of see it's going to be grainy, but this looks really good. We're going to go back into solid view. So now you can see we've got this nice smooth animation on 2 different axes. So to render this, these are going to be the same render settings that I use for all 3 of these shots. So I'm going to talk about them now, and then we'll talk about, putting them together at the end. But for this, I'm going to be rendering in cycles, and then I have a GPU, so I have this set to GPU. I leave the default noise threshold at 0.01 on the render. I have mine set to denoise, and then I'm using 500 samples. But a trick that is really good to know is if I render this image, I'm in slot 1 right now. This image looks really good, by the way. So when this finishes, I can tell that it took me 8 seconds to render this, and this is what it looks like. I'm going to click this and then click 2 on my the row of keys at the top of my keyboard. And now this is basically a different slot. I'm going to drop the samples down to like 250, and then I'm going to render again. And what that's going to do is it's going to give me 2 different images. And when this finishes rendering, we'll see the denoise. And now if you hit the 1 and 2 on your keyboard, this is going to swap between them. And I'm swapping between 1 and 2, and there's basically no visual reference. And I dropped my render time from 8 seconds to 4 seconds. So when you do these renders, do a test and see how many samples you need. Because if you don't need that many, because like for example, this doesn't have tons of glossy pieces or things that have high transmission or anything. So we can get away with using some different samples or lower sets of samples. The other thing that I don't like is this harsh fall off of the light right here because of the way it's set up. So what I'm going to do to fix that is just go into rendered view on this thing so I can, or this window so I can see it. I'm going to shift D and I'm going to bring that over here, and then I'm going to bring it way back, something a little bit closer like that. And then I'm going to take the power down. Let's try 5. And then, it's kind of, let's just bring it down. GZ and then GZZ to move it along its axis. We still want it to be dark. We just don't want it to have a sharp shadow right there. So that looks good. So now, as far as rendering it, I highly recommend that you use a PNG sequence if you have a computer that's very prone to crashing. This is a very small scene, so I'm actually just going to render. I rendered these out as videos whenever we did it. I'll show you both ways. So on your output settings, click output and then select the folder that you want to use. So I have this folder. We'll go to YouTube, this renders. Let's just say we're going to save it here. Also, it's good to save a name so you can know what it is. So go here and go shot 1 tutorial. Okay. I leave this file extension. That helped me see how long videos are so that when we see them, it'll say 000 to 060. That just tells you that it's a 60 frame animation. And so what you can do is you can do it 2 ways. You can set this to PNG or EXR. If you follow Paulo Fjord, he talks a whole video where he talks about, different file formats. But the most common typically is to use PNG. And then in your color management, leave this the same. Whatever your default is. For me, I'm using HEX. You can use different ones, but this is standard in Blender 4.0. But then the other way that you can do it is to save it directly as a video. And to do that, I use FFmpeg video. And then make sure you set your encoding from Matroska to MPEG 4, because this will do a .mp4 file, which would basically is easier to read and a lot better for different devices. So then at that point, you would just click render and render animation. And so this is going to render out as a video sequence. I'm going to let that go. Okay, now it's finished rendering. So let's see what this looks like. We're going to go to shot 1 tutorial video and play that. And there's the first shot of the thing. So now let's move on to the second shot. Now we're going to kind of reset this scene. So to do that, I'm going to click the camera rig, Alt-R to reset its rotation. I'm going to also Alt-G reset the location of this, G-Y, move it back. I'm going to set this, Alt-G, that's going to bring it back to the center. We're going to kind of just get rid of these lights for now. Put that back, G-Y. We're going to set our depth of field target to just be in the middle with Alt-G. That brings it back to the 3D cursor. G-Y. Perfect. Now, for the second shot, you can see from the video that we're going to do kind of a tied up of the keyboard itself, kind of in the middle. Now, one thing that I want to change on this, somebody commented on the last video, was we needed to fix these knobs. So one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into front view, and then I'm going to select one of these and just show you how to fix it. So I'm going to tab Into edit mode, I'm going to do Control R and bring this down. And then what I want to do is do another Control R here, Control B to bevel it. I'm just going to bring it out to like this. And then I'm going to hit 3 and then select one of these edges here with Alt selected so that we grab it, and then do the same thing, Alt Shift, click this. And then I'm going to hit period on my numpad key to move it in. Right click, extrude faces along normals. We're going to bring this in as a little detail like this. And then we're going to tab into edit mode again, Control R, and then basically I'm going to go into front view so I can see this better. Control R, and we're going to bring this up until we have little squares, because somebody commented and said, hey, it has the nice little grip detail, and I forgot about that when I was modeling this. So just till it looks kind of square shaped, add more loop cuts, and then click escape. Then I'm going to hit 3, Alt Z, and then I'm just going to grab not the bottom row, but every row up to that. So I'm going to leave one row of these flat faces. I'm going to use C to brush select those. Once I have them all selected, I'm going to hit period on my numpad key to center it so I can pivot around it. Alt Z to get out of that. And then I'm going to click I, and then I again. That's going to inset the individual faces. And then I'm just going to bring this down to something like this. So with these faces selected, I'm going to right click and extrude the faces along normals and just bring them out just a little bit like that. And then I'm going to also Control B to only do a tiny amount, give it this many segments or so, something like that. So now we have this grip detail. So if we see that in our next shot, and you can feel free to add that to all 3 of these. I may not do it for this tutorial, but you know now how to add that back if you want to make that detail. So what we're going to now do is we're going to kind of reset everything. So I'm going to grab our camera rig, Alt R. We also need to delete all our keyframes so that we don't have things that jump back into position. So I'm just going to click A and then click down here in the editor, A, X, delete keyframes. So now I'm going to click Alt R on this, or no, Alt G. And then this is already reset. And then this right here, what we're going to do is we're going to change this light. I'm going to bring the spread of the light all the way back up to 180. And then we're going to use this kind of like as a regular key light now. So I'm just going to go in, grab the item and just reset the scale to 1. And then we can change the scale up here. So to do this one, I'm actually just going to rotate this to an angle that I think looks good. So I'm just going to RR and go into front view. We're just going to rotate it like this, go into right, rotate a little bit more. Something like this looks good. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this light as a key light. So front, just bring it up here. In the right hand view, I kind of want it to come from behind, so I'm going to GY and bring it back. And then I'm going to, actually let's rotate a little bit more, something like this. We can increase the scale. And then let's make this really bright, so it's like 600. That looks good. You can see we got nice soft shadows coming across. And then I'm going to also rotate this a little bit more on the x-axis, basically get something that looks like that. A little trick that I learned recently, if you want to see if you have areas that are overexposed, if you go down to your view transform on your output, you can set this to false color. And I'm just going to crank up this brightness real quick to something like 2000. If you have areas that are red, that's telling you that you have overexposure. So what you can do is drop it down to 600. And so I have some barely overexposed pieces right there, and you can just kind of tone that back until you don't have any red. But that's honestly not too bad. If I do even 650, so then I can go back to my output, set the color management back to AGX, and so I can just kind of tell me, hey, this looks pretty good. So then for this, I kind of want to rotate this on the Z axis and kind of get a little bit more angle like this. And then also I want to bring this in, get a detail shot. And then very similarly to the other one, we're going to Shift D on this light, rotate it. It's super bright, so it's washed out. So let's set it to something like 50. And then we're going to also decrease the scale and give us a little bit sharper edges. So now I can come up here. That's too small. And I can bring it close to this side. You can see you definitely want to have gradients of fall off. Flat light is never going to make your product look good. So similar to the other one, I also want to rotate this in this view. I want to make it angled more. That looks really nice. You would definitely want to go back and add that grip pattern to this for these. And then we also need to take our depth of field. I'm going to place it something, oh, that's not the depth of field, something like this. Make sure it's kind of in the center of the keyboard. And then for this one, I'm going to increase the depth of field just a little bit because I want it to be blurred. So I'm going to grab the camera, depth of field. Let's just set this to like 1.25 or something. Kind of help us focus in on that. So now I've got this set up, and then we're going to do basically the exact same setup as before. We're just going to rotate things till we think they look cool. So I'm going to grab, we rotated this way on this one, so let's rotate backwards on this one just for fun. So I'm going to grab RZ here, something like that. Insert, oh, we'll go back to frame 0 first. RZ, something like that. Insert, location rotation, come here, RZ, insert, and actually let's also go RXX and then rotate downwards, something like that. Insert, location and rotation. And then this is still going to be not linear, so I'm going to go AT linear up here. And then we just set this to solid. So now you can see we've got a nice rotating angle shot. So now what I'm going to do is we need to kind of perfect our lighting. So you can see we kind of got some uneven edges. I want to have more shadows, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this completely out, and you can see that you have a lot more better shadows. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to increase that spread, or decrease that spread actually, and then I'm going to move this until we have a nice fall off. That completely changes how this scene feels. So I'm going to increase this a little bit, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to have it a little bit darker and kind of draw your eye along this thing, and then as we move, we're going to kind of bring this in. So what I'm going to do is go to frame 0, insert, location, rotation. I'm going to come out to frame 60, and then I'm just going to bring this across out to here, something like that. Insert, location, rotation. So now you can see we have darker at the beginning and you have lighter at the end. And then what else can we do? Let's add some rotation to this. So let's just go to frame like 0, insert, location, rotation. Come to frame 60, RX. Let's rotate it, something like this. You can see we got kind of even edges of white on the corners. You kind of want this to balance this shot. So insert, location, rotation, AT linear. So now it's going to add yet another angle to this. And these are when you really start setting apart from a beginner animation. The more pieces that you have moving together, it's going to look better and better. So for this one, this is actually pretty close to what I did in the intro animation. I'm also going to rotate this light just to where you can see, like if I go in the front view, that doesn't change too much actually. So like what if I moved it in the G axis? See how those shadows start to move? So if I bring it over here, it's becoming more down. So I'm actually going to insert a keyframe right here, location rotation, and then come to frame 60, GX, to bring this out even more. And then I'm also going to move it up in the G or in the Z axis, kind of help it light up some of these darker areas. So insert, location, rotation. So now you can see you have lots of dynamic pieces and it looks really clean and good. I would use the exact same render settings. You can render it out as a PNG sequence. You can also go back and tweak your lighting. I could use that false color. If you don't like this darker front edge, or if you think that this light could be brighter, it honestly could be a little bit brighter. What if we do 750? Yeah, that looks good. Let's check our false color again. Yeah, see, there's still no red in this scene, even all the way back to here. There's a little bit at the beginning, but so let's go back to this. You don't want your scenes to be under bright or too dark. So I set this to 1000. Let's kind of scrub through. We got some red at the beginning, but not much. Let's go back to the rendered and then set this back to the regular. If we had this, now we have this set to 1000, and look what it would have been at if we did 650. It's just completely made this more flat and not bright enough. So if we brought this even to 1200, that's going to completely change the look of this animation. So use that false color to double check whether or not you're overexposed or not. So now we have our second shot, and I've just rendered that out the same way as we did the first one. And so that's going to be the second shot. So the last one is even simpler. We're going to reset everything. So Alt R, and again, you would have already rendered, so make sure you don't do this before you render this shot out. But once you've rendered that shot out, we're going to do the third shot. We're going to go top, Alt R to reset everything. We're just going to leave this light here for now, and also going to leave this light, but I'm going to move it back. We're going to Alt R for this guy. Oop, well, that resets it pointing down, but you can just RX90. That's going to put it back there. And then make sure you do A, select everything, click A in this bottom window, X, delete keyframes. And so now everything's not tempted to move. So what we're going to do for this shot is we're going to rotate this. I'm going to bring this camera back a little bit, something like that. We're going to rotate this on the x-axis and then kind of do a product reveal. So what we need to do is let's go ahead and start from this. And what we want is it to be dark until it comes to this area. So what we're going to do is we're going to RX. This is kind of like our final. We're going to work backwards this time. So RX, and then we're going to basically bring it till it's 90 degrees. I'm going to hold control so that it snaps at 5-degree increments. And then we're going to move this light to be facing the product here. And we're going to also offset it like this. And then you can see these shadows are here. We could even bring down this size a little bit, and that's going to help darken those shadows up a little bit. And then I actually want it to be a little bit less. Something like that looks good. And so now this is kind of your product shot. And then what we can do is we want it to be dark when we go RX, because as we come back, actually you could do it two ways. And the one that I did, I had it be dark when it came out. So I think what we might actually do is just kind of keyframe this to be dark. So a way that you can do that is, let's just go back to here, RX. Let's just bring it down, something like this. And also for this shot, I brought up the depth of field or the focal length a little bit. So I'm going to set this to something like 90. And then I'm going to check out the scene layout. I'm going to bring this in the Y just a little bit. And then let's go to the right view. We can adjust that later. Right hand view. At the beginning, this is the place we want it to be in. So insert location and rotation keyframe. Wow. Insert location and rotation keyframe. Go to the end, RX, hold control, snap it. You can see this kind of look, this looks really good, this lighting does. And then it also might be a little bit harsh. So I'm going to just GZZ and bring this back. See how this looks. That looks really good. This is kind of like a classic Apple look for a white background. And then I'm just going to bring this in. You can see we got really dark shadows on this. So I'm just going to bring this up and in. And then I'm going to GX, bring it to the middle. It's too sharp, so I'm going to increase the scale. That's going to make the light softer. And then GZZ, bring it back. That kind of gets rid of that. And then one thing that we can do is if we kind of want to have a little bit of shadow, we can go here, rotate it like this. That gives us these nice angles. And then we could decrease the spread and just pull it down, pull it down, pull it down. That's going to make it a lot brighter. So let's set this to 500. Let's even set it to 600. And then let's check our color again. So scroll down, view, transform, false color. You can see we have a lot of overexposure. So let's go to our light and try 450. A little better. Let's try 400. You got nice warm colors all around. So let's go back to our output. False color AGX. And then we need to set the rotation keyframe. Looks like we lost our keyframe here. Oh no, we didn't. Then we go to frame 60, right, RX, bring it over, set it to 90, insert location and rotation. For this one, you can kind of animate it how you want, but since we've done linear for everything else, let's kind of make it go quicker at the beginning and then slow down at the end. So what I'm going to do is get rid of everything but the X rotation. I'm going to click home, and that's going to center these up. And so what I want to do is I want to grab the handle of this keyframe right here, and I'm going to bring that up something like this. And then basically what that's going to do is this is the rate of change of the X rotation. So it's going to basically change very quickly and kind of snap into place. You don't want it to go too high here, because if you go too high, it's basically going to go past and come back. If I exaggerate this, I'll show you. So right now, if you go too high, it'll rotate forward. I mean, that's a cool animation if you wanted to do that, but I don't want it to do that. So I'm going to bring this down like this. And then I'm also going to bring this one, and then I'm going to, actually, let's just GX, and that'll lock it in this axis. So let's do something like this. So now this thing will kind of pop back into place. And that's a little bit strong, so let's just pull it down. That's a nice look. We're going to set this animation to be a little bit longer. Let's set it to like 100 frames. And then what we want to do is, again, add some more different angles and variation to what happens. So we're going to pull this here. It's going to come all the way to here, and it's going to stop. And so what I want to do is, at the beginning, I want it to be darker. So here, let's take this and let's set the light at the beginning. Let's just turn this off. Actually, we want it to be full brightness here at frame 40. So let's set a keyframe here. And then at frame 0, let's set this to 0 and set another keyframe. So now what happens is this is basically going to increase in brightness. I'm going to set this to linear, so AT linear. And then also let's do the same thing for our other light so that we kind of have a dark reveal at the beginning, or at least a little bit darker. So we want it to be full light by, let's say, 30. Insert a keyframe. Let's come back to 0, and then let's just drop this down to something like 150 or even 50. So now you got a real dark kind of contrast going on here. Let's insert a keyframe. So now it'll be dark at the beginning and give you some contrast, and then by the time you get up to here, it looks good. So now what we want to do is we need some movement on our y-axis from our camera. So let's go to 0, insert location rotation. We want it to stop coming forward a little bit after the keyboard keeps rotating. So we're going to stop at 60, come out to 70. Let's go GY. Let's bring it into something like this, kind of keeping a good composition on the frame. Insert location rotation. And then this one, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to kind of keep it moving linearly and then slow it down. So I'm going to go into the drop downs. This is all within the graph editor, just in case you can't find that. So click this, go into your graph editor to edit your keyframes. We're going to get rid of all the keyframes except the X location and click home. And then what I want to happen is I want it to be pretty linear. Oh, it's both are selected, so Control Z. I want this to be basically a straight line up until the end, but then I want it to slow down at the very end. So I'm just going to adjust these to where something like this happens. This is actually a little bit strong. Bring this in. So now if we look at our animation, the camera comes in, it brings it to right there. It's actually a little bit, I don't like where it is. So this is a good thing to know. Let's say you're in this and like this starting position is too close, but I want everything to be the same animation, but I want it to be further back. You can grab all your keyframes and then GY. And what that's doing is you're changing your total value on your x-axis and you're changing them all at the same rate. So I'm going to bring this back to something like this. And then you can see this animation looks great right here. And that is basically it. I would maybe even set this to be a little longer. You see how it feels flat? So when I extend this here, it stops really quickly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this GX and then click 10. Let's even do 20. And then bring this out because we don't want it to be a jarring end. So let's do this. It's still a little bit quick. So let's scale this up. Let's also bring this down to where it doesn't come in quite so much. That's part of the reason why it looks so jarring. So now we've got a pretty linear line. Much better. So if I go into the solid view, you can really see the animation. The more experience you have with doing product animation, the more you learn that your curves and the speed at which your animations happen really makes and breaks the way that the product looks and feels. So I'm actually going to set this to 120, give us a little bit extra time. And then that is the exact same process. So I would go into the rendered view. I would double check my lighting, oh, let's do one more thing. Let's make this move just so where we have some variation on the shadow. So we've already set keyframes for the brightness, but I'm just going to go GX, or actually let's just leave this something like this to start. Insert location rotation, come out to frame 60. We're just not going to move it a bunch. We're just going to move it enough to where we can see those shadows move just a little bit. So I'm going to set it here, insert location rotation. That's actually too far. I don't want it to be changing at the end. So let's bring it back to something like this. And then if you went into this light and looked at the transformations, the X location is the only thing that would have changed. So I need to turn this power one off because when I did the home to view it to normalize it, you can also do that by clicking normalize here. That's what the home key does. So I'm going to click A, and then actually I was saying on this one, it starts slow, speeds up, and then goes here, and then gives it just a little bit of movement on this, and I actually like the way that looks. So this is the final shot. That's exactly what I would do to create these 3 shots, and then you can put them together in the editor of your choice. You can put them in together on something free like Canva. Blender has a video editing feature to where you can open a file in video editing and drop your files in and put it together that way. I'm not going to go through the sound design and different stuff like that. If you're interested in a video in that, let me know. Also, for my next videos, I could do another tutorial, or I can talk about the way that I do freelancing as a 3D artist and what I charge and how those projects came about and how the last year has looked for me. So let me know what you think, which of those that you would be interested in seeing as I kind of make some more videos. And I really hope you enjoyed the Blender product design series, starting all the way back from modeling this whole keyboard from scratch, doing the texturing, and then also creating this full animation. So thanks for watching. Consider subscribing if you enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next video.